Hello everyone, I'm day weather meteorologist Don Day with your Public Lands Council weekly weather update for this January 14th, 2023. It's being brought to you by WSR Insurance Services Incorporated. Also being brought to you by Ag Risk Advisors. Well, what the last 3 weeks has brought to California and the West Coast, it's good news and bad news in terms of what's coming. There's more rain coming to the West Coast here for a little bit longer. And I know it's been causing a lot of problems, but the benefits from all this moisture will pay big dividends down the road. We'll have another week of this. We do see a drying trend, though, especially after January 20th. The West Coast is going to see an end to this constant parade of West Coast storms. However, until then, we're going to continue to see more snowpack get built up, more rain going into the reservoirs that mountain snowpack will melt into those later on. And we continue to see great snowpack conditions across many areas of the central Rockies, although the southern Rockies and northern Rockies could use a bit more. But I think that will be something we'll see here in the coming weeks where those areas will get help because colder and unsettled weather for the desert southwest, the Rockies, and the plain states will develop early to mid next week. This shift in the weather pattern that's going to end up causing a drier trend for the West Coast is going to end up basically sending the coldest unsettled weather into the central United States. This would include the Rockies, the northern and central high plains, parts of the southwestern United States, and southern plains as well. And this is going to transition into a colder weather pattern in many areas of the central United States after January 20th, and we're likely going to be more often than not colder into early February as well in this pattern. So patterns are changing. It'll take a while to evolve, but we see those pattern changes coming. Over the last week, another very wet period of weather, and you can see some really good precipitation in this area here. Obviously, California. Look at these heavy snows in the mountains of Idaho and Utah back into Nevada, but the central Rockies as well. Now, we've been pretty dry in eastern Montana, the Dakotas. Well, really for the last 2 or 3 weeks, there's been really not much weather up there. That'll continue as well as this area here. But as the weather pattern shifts, those areas I just circled will probably see some help coming their way. Look at snowpack areas. Snowpacks in some areas have gone more than 300% of normal in the Sierras. That is amazing amounts of snowpack. The dark blue and the light blue areas showing where snowpacks are well above average. And you can see this covers a lot of real estate and some of the key drainages. We'll see some significant runoff this spring, even if the snow settles down, and it won't, at least here in the short term. We've already built up a lot of good snowpack. And look at the reservoir storages that are going to be increasing in California. The Oroville Dam, a big dam, is already at 93% of its historical average, and it will likely fill. Same for the Shasta Reservoir in Northern California. Already some reservoirs have reached their historical trends after being way, way, way below average over the last 3 years. So the California water supply getting a huge, huge boost in this, despite all the flooding and other problems that are going on. Over the last 2 weeks, snowfall has been prolific, as we've been showing. That's one reason why those snowpack numbers look like they do. Now, the forecast looks like this. Here's the next storm coming into the West Coast this weekend. So another West Coast storm will come on in, bringing more rain and more snow to the west. We've got a storm that will be hugging the East Coast, but generally a mild flow of air from the Pacific will be coming into most of the central and western United States, with the cold, wet weather right here along the coast. Now, some of that moisture will spread east. Notice by Monday, this is Sunday and Saturday, by Monday, we've got some areas of low pressure getting further east. So this will bring some precipitation to the plains and more for the central and northern Rockies and more along the west coast. By next weekend, this is where things change. Notice the straight line flow of air coming in off the west coast. The jet stream winds through the weekend, continuing to be very strong, dragging that Pacific moisture into the far west. But by the end of next week, high pressure builds and the jet stream takes a big turn. It goes up into Alaska and then dips into the Rockies and Central Plains. So this cuts off the supply of moisture to California, Washington, and Oregon, just turns off the spigot. Cold air then has access into the Rockies and Central Plains, and a shift to colder, more stormy weather for the northern plains and the central plains will be developing during this time frame. Over the next week, you can see there's a lot of blue, orange, and yellows across the western United States. But notice this area right here I want to point out. There is a hint here that parts of Kansas, the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles, and some very dry areas of northeastern New Mexico and southeastern Colorado through Kansas might be able to pick up some badly needed precipitation as we start to see a transition from the storminess kind of move off the west coast and more into this region here as we get into the next couple of weeks. And this is the snowfall forecast, and there you can see the snow may be getting a little bit further out onto the plains here, across the northern plains as well, before heading into the Great Lakes, and more snow coming for the central Rockies, parts of the southwest and the west coast, at least over the next week or so. Have yourself a good week ahead. Be ready for the changes in the long term.